Welcome, everybody. We are really pleased to have tonight Dr. Yaprack Onat, who is the Assistant Director of Research for the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, CIRCA. The mission of the Connecticut Institute of Resilience and Climate Adaptation is to increase the resilience and sustainability of communities vulnerable to the growing impacts of climate change on the natural built and human environments. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Welcome, everybody. We are going to talk about today what climate change impacts our own Connecticut and what the state is doing for adaptation options. When we think about the climate change, let's go back to sandy times. It might have affected and find your homes flooded like this scene from the town of Fairfield, and realize that how vulnerable we are considering all the natural impacts are affected and how our daily lives can change upside down. Actually, pandemic also show that to us. Climate change is happening, how much it's impacting the Connecticut. What you're seeing right now is the black line shows like the historical changes for the annual temperatures for Connecticut, and the red line is the modeled approach and the projections for the future. So you can see that it's an increasing trend. And that's for the temperature, but we also have it for the sea level rise. You may heard about IPCC, and that's the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. In those IPCC reports, you may heard about that they generally have projections for the sea level rise. Their IPCC different projections go from very high, like catastrophic scenario, to medium-sized scenarios. So here, the blue line that you see for Connecticut, that's just like the water level change from tidal stations. So without anything, if you just extend that line, do nothing, that's already happening. And these are the impacts of the carbon dioxide emission, how much it may increase. You can see that by the year 2100, there's a lot of change, like variation, almost like a 5 feet variation is going on for the sea level rise projections. But when we come to 2050, the projection estimates are kind of close together. That's one of the reasons that we have a planning threshold decided. So in this region that all these guys are coming together, we take the average and decide the planning threshold is actually accepted for sea level rise up to 20 inches by 2050. And air warming is up to Fahrenheit by 2050. This is the projections for the sea level rise is already accepted by the Public Act 1882. This also needs to show that it needs to be repeated every 10 years. And that's also accepted because so that since the estimation is having a lot of variation, we would like to limit that approach by repeating it every 10 years. So that's what we need to prepare for, but how 20 inches may not seem like that much. So how it is actually changing the storm conditions. What you see here is the new London tidal gauge station, and what you are seeing here is the elevation change. So the water level fluctuations. Here, let's say that I took a threshold for 4 feet. What are the events? There are only just 5 events here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 events are happening above 4 feet threshold that I'm setting here. So the annual chance of happening this is 6%. But let's see that this is the average sea level or mean sea level. That's what we call. We are putting 20 inches on top of this. So we are adding this up here. So as you can see, the mean sea level rise is increased. And now we actually have 48 events are passing that threshold. So your risk is increased to from 6 to 60 annual chance. And when I'm talking about this probability, I just wanted to mention that because the town managers, engineers, and FEMA talks about this annual exceedance probability or return interval. They use it interchangeably. But they're not the same thing. So FEMA generally mentions about a 100-year event, which has 1% chance for happening annually. So that's what they describe it. So let's say that you have that here, that this year. Is it going to mean that the next event that you're going to see 100 years later? That's definitely wrong. because storms don't have a schedule. They don't, not say that, hey, I'm going to come this time. That just means that annual chance of having that 100-year flood is 1%. So every year you have the same chance. When we look at for the Sandy again, so now we are talking more scientifically, you can see all the numbers here stated. This is our 100-year event, and it is actually coming close to the Sandy. This is where our Irene is for Bridgeport. All the blue dots here represents the events modeled, so historically happened events. And this orange line represents how it's projection. So it's like fitting it so that when we don't have a data here or here, we can estimate that. So the elevation here I'm gonna show is hitting almost like 2.8 meters. So this is what I know that the storm Sandy was obtained, like modeled. This green dashed line shows that the 20 inches of the sea level rise. So where is it hitting right now? It is hitting to this location. The same elevation is hitting to that location. And it corresponds to, when I come back here, almost 10 years. Similarly, the same thing I do it for the Irene, like 10 years, is almost coming to the 3 years. How frequently you're going to see that event is changing dramatically. So not only just that you are having a flood increase, but also the annual chance of happening the same event is increasing drastically. So there is a chance that instead of seeing the Hurricane Sandy, 1% chance that you have that happening, you can have that in 10% chance. And that's a big thing. And a 10% chance or Irene event can happen every 2-3 year time frame, but not every 2-3 year. Every 2-3 year is the return interval that's stated. So 50% chance is happening. So all these things that we are seeing in the flood frequency increase made us think that what can we do? We need to ask for science. Like how are we going to do this planning approaches? So we need to do some modeling approaches. And that's why Circa has like some different types of tools that we can use. The first one that I wanted to show is our sea level rise viewer. This is the town for Norwalk. And what you are seeing right now is a 100-year flood event, 1% chance happening annually. And what you're seeing right now is the plus 20 inches. So meaning that what would be expecting it in 2050. You may not see much change. That's true. Look at here. There's an event like a little bit more flooding. Here's a little bit more flooding. This is actually can be understood in different ways. Connecticut, due to its formation, is fortunate that we have this like valley formations, marshes, and every area. Up to some certain elevation, the flood is going, and anything more, it's not expanding more like that. It's not really, there's only a limited places that are very, very flat. So that means that here right now, like 1% annual chance of happening this flood, and in 2050, the 10% chance of flood happening here is actually covering the same region. We did the flood modeling for Long Island Sound, and what you can find from all these like historical events that we analyzed between 2050 to 2018, there are actually 44 events that we analyzed for all the towns along the Long Island Sound, that you can see different risk events, storm surge events, and their mapping, and also how much the extent is going to change for 2050, or how the risk is going to change for your town in 2050. We also have for specific towns and regions that we are doing a higher resolution modeling, which is to find like how the infrastructure and the roads are flooding due to waves and also the surge, so the total impact that we are looking for. And on top of it, like we need to understand that what is the vulnerability going on. All these things that I talked about is just like the flood mapping right now. So the risk that we are having, or the vulnerability in terms of that we are having, is not only just limited to flood extent. It has different components. It has heat, biodiversity, a coastal stressor, which can be from waves or storm surges, or health infrastructure impacts, and water quality and air quality impacts. So to look all of them, we actually need to understand which locations are vulnerable, so we can prioritize where we need to direct our resources first, where we need to plan it first, where we need to prepare for it first. And for that vulnerability assessment, we create that categories, because there are different elements that's incorporating that. We develop them into exposure sensitivity and adaptive capacity. You just need to think about it as like a seesaw approach. So the exposure and sensitivity shows the impact that your system is going through, and adaptive capacity is just that ability to cope. Just to give an example, is exposure can be a high heat wave or a heat stress there. Sensitivity can be your vulnerable population there or critical habitat there. Adaptive capacity can be a marsh zone, which acts like a buffer for any kind of sea level rise. So as you can see that they have a different composite relationship. So if you actually have a higher adaptive capacity, you're going to have a lower vulnerability and vice versa. So for this perspective that we created different vulnerability assessments, but to do that regionally, because the area is very big, we created this index approach. You are seeing right now is a flood vulnerability. In this picture, what is really understandable that darker colors and lighter colors. So in the darker colors that we have actually high vulnerability versus compared to the lighter colors. And for the region that you are selecting, you can see from all these exposure sensitivity and adaptive capacity, which of the factors are contributing more. We have done this for the heat, and by clicking these tools, that you'll be able to see that actually which one is impacting more. In the sensitivity, for example, I know that build sensitivity, private wells, this square has private wells. Like you can go it up to the grid approach, and every grid is 10 acres. This is the heat vulnerability index that's showing again from the numbers that these numbers, just to give you an idea like what is contributing more. So by looking at them, I actually can understand what's contributing more. And then we also did it for the wind vulnerability. For all these climate elements, for the wind, heat, and also the flooding, they're all going to combine to do the climate assessment. But in addition to that, we need to consider our infrastructure. So around like 2017 and 18, FEMA actually created this concept called community lifelines, basically to understand the priority of the life-saving structures, just to give emergency managers a tool to more stabilize these structures and understand and give a framework for like what they are. We looked for in the flooding perspective that which structures are gonna impacted by different scenarios. So these are the lifelines defined for the Fairfield, town of Fairfield. And these are the storm surge projections that you are having. What this explains to you is, for example, rail line is almost like 5% is going to be flooded or flood impacted by the 100-year storm, and almost doubles it to the 10% by 2050. And these are the projections for the 2100. So that's kind of gives the planners or the town an understanding that what I need to definitely protect. I can see that the childcare facilities, 6 of them are impacted no matter what in 2050 and right now, but then it increases dramatically, for example, in the food providing places. Or I can see that, okay, this local law enforcement is only impacted by the worst case 2100 scenarios. So this kind of gives you an understanding what's going on. This is the end of my talk. Thank you so much for listening.